Welcome to the show. I'm Katie Fang. We're going to do something a little different today. We're going to spend the whole show talking about the war on women in this country. We'll talk about some of the blatant misogyny we're seeing on the right. We'll also talk about what the sports world is and isn't doing to protect women. And we'll take a deep dive into the startling statistics of just how underrepresented women are in positions of power. But I want to start today with life in America after the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Abortion is now outright illegal or heavily regulated in at least 12 states. At least 10 other states have laws in place that could soon trigger a ban or severely restrict access to abortion. But lately, we have seen some signs of hope. Just this week, voters in Kansas turned out in historic numbers to protect the right to an abortion in that state. And President Biden just signed an executive order that allows for Medicaid to help people pay for out-of-state travel for an abortion. Voters and the executive branch are showing some fight, but women across the country are still suffering. Just look at Texas. A woman in Houston couldn't receive the care she needed right away to treat pregnancy complications that would put her own life at risk. She had to wait for days, all because of the abortion ban there. Last month, the Texas Medical Association sent a letter to the state's medical board saying that the association has received complaints that hospital administrators and lawyers could be prohibiting doctors from treating ectopic pregnancies and other emergencies. According to the CDC, 700 women die every year in the United States due to pregnancy-related complications. And a recent study found that states with abortion restrictions have higher rates of maternal mortality than states without those restrictions. All of that is to say nothing about the challenges of parenting. Right now, the Senate is negotiating a version of the Build Back Better bill without provisions for paid leave or childcare programs. Democrats reportedly removed that language from the bill to secure the vote of sometimes Democratic Senator Joe Manchin. Right now, America is the only wealthy nation in the world that does not have a national program for paid leave. A country where the average cost of childcare is, get this, $16,000 a year. So here's the reality. Women are struggling to live fully autonomous lives with equal access to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Today's young women and girls face a reality where they have fewer rights than their mothers. That is the America we're living in right now. So the question is, what are we going to do about it? Joining me here at my table today, Molly Jong-Fast, contributing writer for The Atlantic, and Danielle Moody, host of the Woke AF Daily and co-host of Democracy-ish podcasts. Ladies, thank you for being here. For this special, I could not have thought of two better people, friends that were willing to have a transparent conversation, an honest, blunt conversation about a lot of the issues that we talked about in the intro. Well, let's start with abortion in this particular segment. Molly, I want to start with you. Let's talk about Kansas. Glimmer of hope, historic turnout to protect abortion rights in that state. But do you think that vote in Kansas, is that the green light that Democrats have been waiting for to say we can do it and we can replicate it in other states?
Yeah. I mean, I also think that this has always been true, right? That Roe has always been popular. What the Supreme Court did was very much out of the mainstream. And because we have this bias towards normalcy, even in the mainstream media, we heard people say, you know, well, this is treating it like it was normal when it was really an earthquake. And I think that's what's important. And what happened after the Dobbs decision came down was that women in Kansas registered to vote in record numbers. I mean, there was a huge spike if you look. And so you see that women in Kansas don't like the government involved in their bodies.
And that's typically a red state, Kansas.
Yeah, it's a state that Trump won some more than 58%. I mean, so clearly this is a situation where more people are broadly pro-choice than they are Democrat, than they go on partisan lines.
Yeah. And Danielle, though, let's be clear, though, it's not like there's no restrictions now left in Kansas. It was the idea of preserving what was currently on the books versus getting rid of the ability whatsoever to have access to abortions in Kansas. But do you think because that's a red state, because it's such an important issue, do you think that that plan or that strategy can actually see the same and similar success in other jurisdictions or other states?
Here's the thing that Kansas showed is that Democrats need to stop running from the issues that people care about, right? More than half of this country are people with uteruses, right? And they want to be able to control their outcome, their future, and their lives. And so when we see a situation where incest doesn't matter, rape doesn't matter, when we have Republicans having conversations about the parenthood process of a 10-year-old or a 13-year-old girl, you're like, did we jump the shark here? Like, have we entered crazy town? This is the same party that wants to talk about pedophilia, but they are totally fine with a 10-year-old or a 13-year-old girl becoming mothers, being forced into parenthood. And so I think that just the idea that this is the reality that we are living in, that women across this country, particularly white women, because black and brown women have always come out as pro-choice. But I think that white women are saying, wait a minute, in cases of rape, incest, you're telling me that I have no choice, that the rapist gets to choose the mother of their child I mean, what world is that?
A world that apparently the Supreme Court of the United States thinks is appropriate. Molly, I want to switch back to you. This is a little bit of some sound from Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell about the outcome of that abortion vote in Kansas. Let's take a quick listen to it.
Well, I think what the Supreme Court has done is said people who are elected by the American people are going to deal with this highly sensitive issue, and it'll be playing out all year. And I don't think we really know until the end of the year what kind of an impact putting this issue back into the hands of those of us who are elected, as opposed to 9 unelected judges, will have on the country. We're in the process of finding that out.
Do you think Kansas tells you something about that?
It tells us that there were a lot of people interested in the issue in Kansas. There's no question about that.
Typical McConnell, we don't get necessarily a straight answer. But Molly, do you think that there is some concern now on the minds of the GOPers that really want to drive this control issue over women's bodies?
Yeah, they caught the car, right? They never thought. And remember, Roberts was worried about this. Roberts knew that this would be the thing, that they should just add restrictions and not overturn Roe, because it was like showing their hand. And I think that, yeah, I mean, they caught the car. They don't know what to do. Half these bills don't have provisions for the life of the mother, right? They don't have provisions for rape and incest. So they're set up in a way that they're sort of like that they might never be enacted. And now they're going to be enacted. And we're going to see more and more of these horror stories of the 10-year-old girl who had to go out of state, or the woman who goes on a breathing machine because they won't they won't treat her for whatever.
Yeah, they won't give her a D&C that she would need, that kind of stuff.
I mean, there's we're going to see more and more of those horror stories, and every one of those horror stories is going to move a voter towards, that this higher level of restriction is not okay.
Yeah, but Danielle, what about an unusual unicorn of the GOP female politician? What type of pickle is that now for her to have to reconcile the numbers of voters that came out in the rural, typical red Republican voting districts, like in Kansas, for example, that came out in droves to say, we're not going to accept stuff like this?
I mean, the reality is that this, as Molly has said, is not a partisan issue, right? This is about abortion care. This is about health care for women. And anyone who has been pregnant or who has gone through an abortion process understands, like, the strain, the physical strain on your body. And so these women are looking at this and they're saying to me, well, I'm not going to have this choice. I literally, you have these Republican politicians, these women who, frankly, vote alongside white men and have all the time. They give their power away all the time. And this is an opportunity for them to say, you know what? I don't like what you're doing with the power that I've given you. You're not actually representing my best interests. And I think that for those Republican women that are in power, that they need to start making a decision not just to vote alongside these men, but to stand up for themselves in a way that they have not before.
Yeah, Molly, we saw, though, that white women were a big reason why Donald Trump won, which is really interesting to consider this messaging. But, Danielle says this is not a partisan issue. My body, my choice should never be partisan. And yet if the Democrats are smart, strategically, they make it the partisan issue that it needs to be. It may appeal universally to all women and even men, too, that are allies in this fight. But Is the messaging need now to be, you got to go to the polls in November. You have to vote in these record numbers because of this key one issue of all issues?
I mean, I think this is a big issue. I think it's a much bigger issue than
economy
most pundits have. No, I mean, I think the economy is a big issue, but I think abortion is really big. And I don't think that it's been really cooked into the stew the way that other issues have. Look, inflation is a big issue. Gas prices, though, now oil is going down. So I think that will be interesting to see how that plays out. But I do think there are a lot of women who don't like the idea that Republican politicians will have more of a last word than their doctors about what happens to their bodies. I don't think that's a winning message for Republicans.
Yeah, Danielle.
And I would just add really quickly is that we have to start talking about abortion as an economic issue, because I'm confused about how we're expanding families, but we're not expanding people's wallets. I'm confused about how we're forcing people to give birth, but we're not providing childcare, right? And so when we talk about this issue and we say that it's a woman's issue, how is it not an economic issue? Because it's not as if Republicans are offering up legislation that's saying, oh, by the way, you know that baby that we're forcing you to have? We're going to take care of it. We're going to give you universal pre-care. We're going to give you daycare. We're going to give you supplemental income for the extra mouths that are now around your kitchen table that you can't afford to feed. And you knew that, right? So my thing here is that we need to stop part and parceling these issues as if they are siloed. They're not. It's part of a larger system.
Yeah, we talked about that in the intro to the segment, the idea about Build Back Better, not including paid leave, universal child care. It is so expensive to maintain a home generally, but to be able to support a child, it's even more expensive. Ladies, thanks for having this conversation right now.